Dale?
I'll jump in. Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Leposki. I'm a professor of geography and also current president of MUNFA.
Thank you,
I'm
Josh.
Erica. I'm in the chemistry department and I'm the co-chair of the Academic Freedom and Grievance Committee.
Thanks, Erica. Keep muting myself. Hopefully I don't do that too often. Any other representatives on from any MUNFA committees who wish to identify yourself before we get started? Okay, well, listen, that's fine. So we've got a presentation we're going to go through this afternoon. As Dale mentioned, it is being recorded and will be posted on our respective websites. As well, what we found helpful in prior presentations, given the number of people who were on the meeting and presentation, is that if you would post your question in the chat dialog box, Dale and others will keep an eye to that. Oftentimes the answer will be, Eric or others may put the answer right in there. If not, we can take a break after a couple of questions compile there and go through them. We want this to be very informative this afternoon. And it's a joint presentation, as I say, between Faculty Relations and MUNFA. Just we'll take the lead on some of the slides, but rest assured the MUNFA folks will be joining in and participating as they see appropriate. So the first things we'll do is bring up the presentation. And so hopefully everyone can see that. As I say, the challenge is from my particular screen, I don't see any hands. So as I say, if you can put your questions or comments or queries, your own experiences in the chat section of the dialog box, that'd be perfect. Thanks very much. We've got two sessions. One is scheduled for today, and we've got another one next week. And in terms of the overview of the presentation, as mentioned, it is a joint presentation. Some of the key points we're going to touch on are the committee composition. Summary, we want to provide a summary of the promotion and tenure process. As well, we want to provide some understanding of some of the common trouble areas. One as well, talk about, which we'll cover off in the last section, some of the functions of the P&T committees in terms of their roles. And other than that, it's meant to be a very informative, a very informal process. What I will say is we generally don't have too many issues arise with respect to the process for the P&T cycle, which is very positive. And I think these sessions go a long way in trying to alleviate and address any of those problems before they arise with respect to the process. So with respect to the composition, first point is there we talk about is the composition of the committee. One of the points to note here under the collective agreement, particularly clause 704, is that where candidates under consideration presents a documented record of personal conflict with a faculty member, and the head determines that documented personal conflict creates a reasonable apprehension of bias, then the faculty member shall recuse themselves from serving on the committee for that candidate. So a couple of things I want to talk about with respect to this particular aspect, this particular clause. One is it specifically makes reference to a documented record of personal conflict. So that's more than a disagreement, if you will, between colleagues. It's specifically a documented record of personal conflict. So there's some documentation associated with it. And the second component of that is, and the head subsequently determines that does create a reasonable apprehension of bias. And when those two factors are combined and fall in place, then essentially the committee member must recuse themselves from serving on the committee for that candidate only. So they can serve on the committee for other candidates, just that particular candidate, they would remove themselves from serving and viewing that individual's file. Similar clause exists with respect to librarians in clause 1303 of the collective agreement. So I think that is we often get a lot of questions on that, and many of our questions are related to those who have had disagreements, if you will, with colleagues in the past. So this particular clause makes reference to there being a documented record of personal conflict. We're a faculty member. Go by side screen here. Yep, we're a faculty member who's a member of the
Can't
P&T.
find the damn thing.
Has within the past 6 years been an academic supervisor of a candidate under consideration. That faculty member as well shall recuse themselves from serving on the committee for that candidate. So that's another one of the criteria that the collective agreement highlights with respect where it will be inappropriate for an individual to serve on the committee and assess that particular individual's file. So that's another example. That particular clause is clause 705 of the collective agreement. Collective agreement as well, you'll note, makes some specific reference to those who are sorry, I think somebody has their mic left open. You just have a look at that when you get a chance. Thanks. Collective agreement makes reference to those who are not eligible to serve if, one, you are applying for promotion or tenure yourself, or you're being considered for an extension of tenure track appointment, or you hold a term appointment of less than 2 years. And there could also be circumstances which, if you are in a conflict of interest with a candidate, once again, you can still serve on the committee, but you've got to recuse yourself from serving on for that particular candidate only. With respect to a couple of points on this particular clause under the collective agreement, with respect to trying to determine whether a conflict of interest exists with a candidate, I would refer you and suggest you have a look at clause 1.38. 1.38 is the commencement of our language that deals with conflict of interest. And essentially what it outlines is if you have a close relationship among a number of grounds or areas, that may indeed create a conflict of interest with a particular candidate. You'll note here, though, that where you can serve somebody who's up for a non-decisionary review, that individual could serve on a
I don't want to get the.
And as well, there are other circumstances. An individual who's untenured, one individual per committee, one untenured member per committee could serve. So as well, that's another area where somebody can serve. And there could be a circumstance too if you found yourself in a situation where, for whatever reason, you felt you just could not provide an unbiased assessment of a candidate's file, then I think it will be incumbent on you as an individual to raise that with your head and request being, to be recused from serving on the committee for that particular candidate. If there was some particular reason, some connection or something, you just felt, look, I can't be unbiased in my assessment here. So that will be another area where you could look to recuse yourself. But once again, only for that particular candidate, not for the committee. Any questions or comments with respect before we move on about the actual composition of the committee, who's eligible, who's ineligible to serve, just so before we move off of that point? I think the collective agreement relatively straightforward outlines those criteria when folks should at least be cognizant of the potential for conflict of interest or reasons that they may not be appropriate to serve on a particular on a committee for a particular candidate.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so I have a case. So, like in a search committee, if a faculty member in a committee is like his supervisor's file, can he participate in that committee?
I'm sorry,
I repeat it again. Like we have a case when a student of another professor become faculty member who is in the committee now. So now, and then supervisor applied for promotion. Now, can a student serve in this committee to review his own supervisor's file?
I wonder, Dale, did you? I'm sorry, just you were cutting in out. I get bits and pieces of the question. Dale, did you get the?
I think
question?
Is the question the person is a former student and now they're the person they worked with, the professor, is now going up for promotion? That was my understanding of the question. And
Yes,
if that-
you're right.
So they were a former graduate student,
Yes, now he is a faculty member.
and now
can
he's a faculty member.
Yes.
But was that relationship within the past 6 years?
Yes, he just finished PhD 2-3 years ago.
Well, I don't know, Amy, subject to any thoughts you folks may have there, but if the relationship was in the past 6 years, I think that would be, I would suggest that would perhaps be grounds for that person recusing themselves from the review of that particular file.
That's right. They can stay on the committee. They just can't review that particular file.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. With respect to Article 10 of the collective agreement, Article 10 deals with the tenure process. So by way of the first point on this one, the tenure cycle for the assistant professor is outlined clearly in the collective agreement. Year 1, there's no review. Year 2, non-decision. Year 3, an extension. Year 4, non-decision year review. However, it's optional. I'll just talk a little bit about that now in a moment. Year 5, a non-decision year review, and year 6, then the tenure decision. So you'll note with this cycle, there is a review each year, with the exception of the first year. And there's provision in the fourth year, year 4, for a non-decision year review for the candidate to decline, if you will, that review. If a candidate is to decide that they decline a year 4 review, that's something that has to be declared to their head and can be noted in the assessment file. And so other than that, all the review each year, the review is mandatory. So it's something that has to occur with the exception of year 4. The tenure cycle is somewhat shortened for those who are appointed at the rank of associate professor. Year 1, no review. Year 2, a non-decision year review. And year 3, there is the tenure decision, and that reflects the shortened cycle by way of being appointed at the rank of associate. With respect to the tenure cycle, one thing of importance here to note is we still, in the parties, tried to address as best they could some of the impacts of COVID by way of an MOU dated September 8th of 2020. It outlines in a current ASM and a tenure track appointment may request deferral of any upcoming review up to 2 years. And the provision there as well includes that any salary increase associated with the granting of tenure shall be retroactive to the date tenure would have normally been granted. So that was included to not provide any financial disincentive, if you will, or any financial penalty for someone who's exercising this option by way of impact of COVID on their progression through the cycle, and things often, most times, beyond their control.
Something to add to that.
Please, Erica.
This is something that committees often have questions about. How do you assess a file that has been extended, or how do you account for the deferral? Essentially, if it's, if the candidate has had a leave or has taken this deferral, and they're going up for their 4th year review, for example, they've got another year till tenure. That's what you're assessing. You're saying, okay, so after 4 years and with 1 year to go for tenure, how is this person doing? What advice do we need to give them for them to continue to improve their file? So it's not like you look at it with the 2-year deferral and say, well, they had 2 extra years. So it really is just saying wherever you are in that tenure process, that's where you're assessing them.
Thanks, Erica. It's helpful. With respect to we've outlined here some of the traditional or the normal dates that are outlined in the collective agreement. So normal tenure decision, that would be in the 6th year for an assistant, 3rd year for an associate. However, as highlighted here, there is new language has been placed in the collective agreement that at the request of a candidate, an associate can associate tenure review can occur in the 4th year. So an individual can make a request that indeed their tenure review occur in the 4th year. However, when doing so, it is also explicitly stated that by September 15th of their 2nd year, they have to make that election. They have to declare that and note it. But this is something that has been, it has been added to the collective agreement, so it is new. And, I think it provides another option for individuals. And I think it's, perhaps we're going to view that it will have some positive impacts. As well, the collective agreement outlines candidates can apply for tenure early. So that would be the 5th year of an assistant or the 2nd year for an associate. And indeed, at the option of the candidate, time spent in term appointments at Memorial may be credited towards tenure cycle. Once again, I believe the collective agreement provides for up to 3 years that can be credited towards your tenure cycle. And the candidate then must indicate by their prior to their first review, indeed, the amount of time that they do want credited towards their tenure cycle. So I say there's some. So we'll go through them today, but there have been some. I would suggest some significant changes in Article 10, and certainly the being able to request review in the 4th year is one of those, which we think is certainly a good change in the collective agreement. With respect to just talking about some of the new language in Article 10. So we got specifically clauses 10.23 and 10.24. So you'll note, for those who would be familiar with the prior collective agreement, there's no longer a requirement for superior performance for early tenure files. Under the previous collective agreement, those seeking early tenure had to do so on the basis of meeting a test, if you will, a criteria of superior performance. That has been eliminated. If indeed performance of a candidate satisfies tenure criteria in clause 10.30, then tenure is granted and the candidate holding rank of assistant promoted to the rank of associate. Likewise, or similarly, if tenure is denied, the candidate's tenure track appointment is not extended or concludes, and they are offered a further 1-year terminal appointment. So one of the, in one sense now, I think what the change means to the collective agreement is there is one submission for tenure. And that submission is one whereby whenever that submission goes forward, it's based upon the criteria in clause 10.30. However, if indeed that tenure submission is unsuccessful, then the candidate is offered a 1-year terminal appointment. So that is a bit of a change here, a rather significant one, with respect to the process for applying for tenure, whether it's early or otherwise. So I think that's one of the key things one of the key changes in Article 10 that was in the new collective agreement.
If I wonder if we should maybe just pause there just to kind of
Yep.
just to see if there's any questions, just because that's such a
Certainly.
significant change to
Yep.
to the collective agreement. Maybe not. Okay.
Okay, well, folks may have questions as we go through, and they could, put them in the chat or raise them at the end there. We can certainly address them. Good point, though.
There's a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I thought I'd speak up rather than type it in because I'm a faster talker than I am typer. So in our committee, we've got people who are up for tenure, people who are up for early tenure, and there's also someone who's applying for early promotion to associate professor. At least that's according to the list. And I was wondering what the difference between that would be. Is this promotion without tenure, or what is the category there? I haven't had a chance to read through the collective agreement in detail to see if that was covered in any of the changes.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any. I don't think that represents any change to the collective agreement. So as I understand, Chris, there's a candidate who's applied for. Did you say both early promotion and early tenure? or just?
No, so this
Oh.
is, so we've got several candidates that are applying. So
Yep.
review for tenure, I'm familiar with. So I'm on our committee. Review for early tenure, I'm familiar with, as the terms are explained here. But one of our candidates is applying for early promotion to associate professor. Now, I know normally promotion to associate professor is concurrent with being granted tenure. Is that correct? So I just thought it was, I was confused by why this particular candidate was listed as applying for early promotion to associate professor, but not tenure, or am I missing something here? Can you apply for promotion without tenure?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, you
Okay.
can. Yep.
Gotcha.
And in fact, Chris, we'll often, if we get calls for people, in particular with this new language, in that if you apply for early tenure and you weren't successful, it wasn't what we called fatal. So you would just go up for tenure next
Gotcha.
year. But now if you apply for early tenure and you're not successful, that's it. Whereas if you apply for early promotion, if you look at the language in the collective agreement, the criteria for both are almost parallel. But if you're not successful for that promotion, then your tenure remains unchanged. So for some people, that might be, they want to try for that promotion, get that salary bump, that recognition a year
Gotcha.
early. They feel that they've met the
see.
bar, but they're not quite, I don't know, maybe they're just being conservative. They don't want to roll the dice on the tenure. Yeah, so I think that's really the only difference that I understand.
No, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, the second round, 1024B. So does that mean that if someone applies for early tenure, and if it is not, if the candidate cannot meet that requirement, so that's it. So then, he or she cannot apply or continue for 5 years, right? So then once you apply, that maybe that if it is not successful, that's it, right? So then that will be then we can give only 1 year of terminal appointment only, right? That's what it means.
Yes. Yeah. So by Paul, that is what it means. Basically, there's one submission for tenure, and if you're unsuccessful in that tenure submission, then that does result in being offered a 1 year terminal appointment. And that is, that's a significant difference from the prior collective agreement.
I see. Okay, but but for promotion they can apply, but if they are unsuccessful, but again they can apply later, right? So
correct. As Amy indicated, the application for early promotion is not fatal. We'll talk about that a bit more when we go through the promotion section, but certainly you're quite right.
Okay, then thanks.
I think there might be a question in the chat as well. Is there a deadline for informing the department heads about applying for early tenure for an assistant professor?
I think it covers, does it not, Amy, fall under the regular notice of tenure? Not sure what the date is, but
it's interesting. Both Jeff and I are looking through the collective agreement because I don't think we know the answer to this question. So it's a good question.
I was just searching. I can't find it, but I know that it's not any different than just applying for tenure.
That's what I understand.
September 1st. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dale.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So there's no different date for early tenure versus tenure of notifying your head. Do we have any other questions, Amy, that you can see in the chat, or no? Boy, Paul,
Got a follow-up question, sorry, from Bonnie White. Yep.
Hey, yes, can you hear me? Great. What if you get an application where the person has not, in their 5th year, they have not applied for early tenure, but once P&T meets, they do ask to be considered for early tenure?
So if Bonnie, if I understand that circumstance, an individual in their 5th year has not requested or submitted any notification to request early tenure. But subsequent to that, when the committee or prior to or some point in time prior to the committee commencing its review of the candidate's file, the candidate notifies the committee that they do want to be considered for early tenure at that point. Is that the question?
Yes.
I'll certainly open the comment to Amy or Eric or others, but I would think that if the individual has not submitted their notification by the prescribed date within the collective agreement to notify of a submission of tenure, I would not think that would be appropriate for the individual to do so. And I think there could be a couple of scenarios open. If indeed there were some, I'll say, very unique circumstances surrounding that, I think the individual could approach MUNFA and try and raise those individual circumstances to see if there was potential there that the parties could agree on a memorandum of understanding, which would somewhat account for those unique circumstances. But that being said, I really don't think it would be appropriate for the committee then to assess the person's file for early tenure when the individual had not submitted their notice of intention to do so in accordance with that with that September deadline. Certainly, I don't know if Amy, if you could have any different perspective on that.
I mean, I think I agree with Jeff. I think that, if September 1 is the date that your file has to be submitted, and when you submit your file, if you are going for early tenure, you would have to indicate it at that time. I don't think you can retroactively go back unless there are extenuating circumstances.
Thank you.
Okay, perhaps then we can move on to the next section of Article 10. And that deals with the external letters of appraisal for tenure. These are an important aspect of the P&T cycle. Collective agreement outlines that 3 to 5 letters are appropriate and required. The referees are to be external to the university. At least 2 of those referees would hold the rank of associate or professor at another recognized university. They shall have a national, international reputation for excellence, and they shall not currently be collaborating with the candidate nor have collaborated in the past 5 years. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about the issue of collaboration. That topic often generates a number of discussions. But other than that, the criteria are pretty straightforward with respect to the external letters of appraisal. We've provided some examples here of what is collaboration. So examples, co-authoring scholarly works, articles, books, papers, presentations, holding joint research grants, co-investigators, submitting joint grant proposals, student-supervisor relationships, joint curriculum development, that collaboration to be impacted here and affect the letters of appraisal that must have been within the past 5-year period. So if it's outside of that 5-year period, it's not it's not something prohibited by the collective agreement with respect to approaching that individual as a referee. However, collaboration is oftentimes not quite that clear. So, for example, there are oftentimes gray areas when determining whether a relationship constitutes collaboration. Some of those gray areas that have arose in the past have been such things as contributions from ed to book or journal, team teaching. They may or may not. As a subject to any comments that folks may wish to make in terms of collaboration, one suggestion is when developing your list of external referees, have a dialogue with your head about whether some of these things fall into this category of collaboration, and or reach out to MUNFA, have a dialogue with them in terms of when you're preparing that, so they provide some good advice as well. Faculty Relations can, but this one is one that we oftentimes have a number of questions on in terms of what constitutes collaboration. Is this person appropriate referee to include in the list? So oftentimes that preliminary discussion may be able to resolve or provide some guidance on those individuals you may be seeking to include. With respect, Bipal, did you have a question there?
I have a question about this collaboration. So although, like you say, that this collaboration and conflict sometimes, it's difficult. to understand, even for like, that for faculty hiring, even for that kind of things. Like, let's say if we have the internal candidates, or if someone like you see co-supervise a student, and then we can have they can write a paper together. So like say if I and other, say the candidate co-supervise a student, so whether that person, even the co-supervising person, would be the co-supervisor would be the conflict in this kind of scenario. Like say someone is co-supervising a student, so jointly maybe with 3 persons supervising a PhD student. So if they apply for a faculty position, or they are file evaluating for PNT, so that is the conflict or not? You see, do you understand my question? Jeff?
Are you is your question geared towards, I wasn't quite sure. I heard
Okay.
something part of your question about hiring somebody. I thought I heard something about,
Okay, so that is, I'm talking about this conflict thing, is a hiring, or even for this PNT file sending to PNT hiring thing also, that over there sometimes when we have the co-supervisor, say, or if someone is in if 3 like in PhD, for in our department, like we need 3 co-supervisors or supervisory committee member. So whether if someone is a supervisory committee member with me, whether in that case it will be a conflict of interest if that person apply for any position or anything.
Yeah. I think if so, yeah, you're talking about like they might not be the direct supervisor, they could be a co-supervisor, or they could be a member of the supervisory review team that reviews the PhD. Is that correct?
A PhD, but is the team, but they are not a student, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
we are supervising 3. Let's say that I have 3 supervisory committee member, and then one of them apply for a job here, for example, right? So the 3 of us, we supervised one student. So if the student, not the student, if the one supervisory committee member applies for a job, so then is it the conflict?
So maybe I can answer this. Sometimes with these individual situations, it's best to just consult with the head or with someone at MUNFA to see what they think. In general, though, if you have been on a supervisory committee meeting with someone else, that doesn't necessarily represent a close relationship.
Okay.
Right. So if you're both on a supervisory committee for another student, that's not, you're not the supervisors, you're not examining the thesis. I guess even if you examine the thesis that someone else also examines, that's not a close relationship for conflict of interest.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question too in this regard.
Yes,
Can I ask
go
a
ahead,
question?
please.
Yeah. So I just specific example, like I have my PhD student, and he worked under my supervision, and we wrote a paper. And then he's from Vietnam, for example. And in this paper, he needed some component that I is not in my area of expertise. And he talked to his professor, like his known person in Vietnam, and he contributed. So now and then with this contribution, he became a co-author. But I never even communicated to that person. So now is he my collaborator? I even don't know him, but he contributed to the paper through my student, and then he became a co-author.
Yeah, this seems like something that you might best talk to your head about, or your dean, or MUNFA, because it depends on what sort of a relationship you had. If you've never had any contact with the person, then maybe not. But yeah, I think it's best to, it's hard to make a blanket statement about that. So I'd recommend that, yeah, you drop a line to MUNFA or your head or your dean.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think some of these questions and Erica's point there highlights that there are gray areas, and often I think a lot of these are going to be determined on, sort of assessed on a individual basis. So it is best to reach out and get some advice in advance in terms of what that would be. But listen, excellent questions. Thanks very much for raising those.
There's a question, and I just wanted to clarify for folks. I think we had that discussion earlier about the application deadline for early tenure. My understanding is it's September 15th, because that's when tenure files are due. But if you're applying for early promotion, you have to notify your head by September 1st, but the file still isn't due until September 15th. So there's a couple of those kind of those dates. And if anybody has any questions or anytime you can't find the stuff in the collective agreement, just reach out to us or Jeff and we'll let you know. But there's a question there about early promotion, or just promotion, sorry, from Leslie. So the question is, if the committee received notification after September 1st that an associate professor not on the initial list to be reviewed wanted to be considered for promotion to full professor, could they be added to the list of files for decision? My understanding is this goes back to, I guess, what we were just talking about a little while ago, that the deadline is September 1st if you are planning to apply for promotion. So, not to be too harsh on people, but if you've missed that deadline, I think unless there is extenuating circumstances, I don't know, Jeff, what would your response be? The same?
Yeah, I think it would, Amy. That and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about the importance of deadlines, and as well in terms of ways and means in which we can address unforeseen circumstances which impact on individuals not being able to meet deadlines, that kind of thing. But I tend to agree, Amy, with your perspective on that. We've generally been pretty consistent, I think, as parties in terms of the deadlines being the deadlines. But we've been, quite happy and willing to work with people and folks to address unforeseen circumstances. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to follow those deadlines. And if they're, all but for unforeseen circumstances, I think those deadlines would adhere. And I think if you missed it, you missed it. But we'll talk a little bit later about some of the ways and means and options under which we can address some of those circumstances to deal with the unforeseen things that do arise and impact on being able to meet deadlines.
2 quick questions.
Yes, go ahead, Walter.
I lied. I actually have 3 quick questions. Number 1, how many letters must be external to the university?
All of the referee letters are external to the university.
All the referee letters must be external to the university.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Question 2, how many referees does the applying candidate choose?
So the list of referees, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but the list of referees is determined in consultation with the head and the candidate. But I believe the collective agreement outlines that at least, Amy, is it 3 of the letters must be those that were from those referees suggested. Two, thank you. 2 of the letters must be from those referees provided by the candidate.
Thank you. And third, final one, what if the candidate disagrees with the head's choice of referees?
So the candidate and the head come to the collective agreement outlines that there's a consultation before any list of referees is distributed, or any information distributed to referees. There's a consultation between the head and the candidate. And in terms of that list of candidates, the collective agreement does provide an option for a candidate who disagrees with a referee's name that's been added there. If they got some concern with that, they do have the ability to note that and put that in writing, and believe that will be placed on the file as well.
And what happens after it's placed on the file? Is that stated in the collective agreement?
No, I mean the candidate's concern or displeasure, if you will, with a particular name being included as a referee, that will be what actually will be stated and documented in the file. Other than that, though, it's not a, if you will, sort of not a veto that indeed that referee could not be used. Amy, I don't know if there's anything further you want to add to that.
No, I think it's just as long as it's noted in the file and it's considered by the committee when they review the letters.
Thank you very much.
And I think as what some of Walter's questions were a good segue into the next slide on external letters of appraisal. Administrative heads must consult with the candidates on the appropriate names of referees. So that process clearly documented and outlined there. That, and from what I understand, there is oftentimes a discussion about the appropriateness and additional names are added or taken off the list. But generally, our experience is that the individuals do come to an agreement on what the list of referees, who they will be. It's important to note here, though, it changed the collective agreement. Clause 10, 11, 14, and 15. Upon the request of the faculty member, potential referees may include Indigenous elders and or traditional knowledge carriers, keepers, who shall be deemed commensurate with all of the referees. That's identified in clause 10, 11. At least one letter of reference from Indigenous elders and or traditional knowledge carriers, keepers must be chosen. So clauses 10 and 14, 10, 15 reflect that as well. So that is a, that's a change this round of bargaining. And I think it's both parties think it's a positive change in the collective agreement, but something to be aware of with respect to the submission of names of referees and including, and if indeed an Indigenous elder or traditional knowledge carrier keeper was to decline providing a letter of appraisal, there's certainly an option in the collective agreement to select one of the other, not an option, but a requirement to select one of the other Indigenous elders or traditional knowledge carriers or keepers that was provided by the candidate. So that's a rather significant change in this collective agreement. Next is the criteria for tenure. There was a slight change in this last round of bargaining. So the criteria is outlined in clause 10.30. One of the points that has been there for the prior rounds, we always make note of this in terms of that last paragraph. In addition to faculty members' teaching load in accordance with 3.27, access to research facilities, specified time of hire, other available infrastructure shall be considered. So if indeed there have been concerns or there's been issues with respect to any of those factors, that is something that should be documented and included in the candidate's file. And we've also included, which we'll talk about in a few moments here, new language in 10.30, which deals with Indigenous knowledge. And we'll talk about that a little bit moment now with our next slide. In terms of areas of assessment, so really what we're looking at here is what's the role of the committee? What is it they're being tasked to do and assess? And those points, the committee's role here in assessment is to assess the documented effectiveness and scholarly competence as teacher, to demonstrate a record since date of appointment of research scholarship or creative and professional activities appropriate to the rank. There's a list of factors to be considered there, as well as some new language regarding Indigenous knowledges. Have a look at that. That's in Article 10.30, and the demonstrated record of academic service. And that's that's what the committee is being tasked to assess. It is the candidate's obligation to complete their file. So it's very important to ensure that the necessary and required information is included in the file. It's not the role of the committee to search for or look for information. It should be there. Their role is to assess what is there. But it's very important that it's candidate's file. It's very important for the candidate to include the appropriate necessary information in the file so that their application submission can be deemed successful.
Jeff, I think there's a question in the chat from Erica with regards to clause 1011. What does notwithstanding mean in clause 1011? Does it overrule clause 1010 subclause A? So Erica's quoted it here. In all cases, at least 2 letters shall be obtained from individuals holding the rank of associate professor or professor at a recognized university. Or would this be an addition?
I think I got the question. I'll take a stab, Amy. In terms of so 1011 is a new clause, and notwithstanding clauses 1010 and 1020. What we were trying to carve out there was we were trying to do a couple of things. We were trying to ensure that the referees from Indigenous elders, traditional knowledge carriers and keepers, that was going to be deemed commensurate with all other referees. So from my recollection of that, the way we've got it worded is those individuals may not hold the rank of professor for you, if you will, or associate professor in another recognized institution, just by way of the diverse path to the academy. So notwithstanding there is meant to, if you will, insulate or provide clarity that candidates can submit names of Indigenous elders, traditional knowledge carriers and keepers, that although those individuals may not hold the rank of associate or full professor, those referees will be considered commensurate with all other referees. Now, I don't know if there was anything different that you wanted to add to that, but I think that's the reference to notwithstanding to say, this, because otherwise it could be a situation of an individual submitting names of potential referees who fit the categories of Indigenous elder, for example, but may not hold the rank of associate or full professor. And without the notwithstanding reference, then those there could be a conflict, but certainly open to any other, that's certainly our understanding of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another question, from Bonnie White. What about research published before date of appointment? Is it considered or excluded? And I just note, when you look at clause 1030, the second paragraph, it states consideration shall also be given. This is the criteria for tenure. Consideration shall also be given to academically relevant achievement prior to the tenure track appointment. So I always tell people when they ask this question, if you did something academically relevant prior to your tenure track appointment, put it in your file. Put it in your file. Put everything in your file. Yeah. And it must be considered based on the collective agreement. So the P&T committee does have to look at it and consider it as part of the individual's file.
Any other questions here, Amy? We should address before we move on.
Good to go.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, sorry there, Jeff. This is Suleiman speaking. Just a point of clarification to Amy's last comment there. So in the case of folks who are going up for non-decision year review, would consideration still be given to publications that maybe they have had prior to admission or being hired by the university, as an example?
So Suleiman, the first part of that cut out for me. That was, you said someone going up for what type of review?
Non-decision year review.
Yeah. To me, it wouldn't matter if it's a non-decision year or a tenure review. The file is the file, and that information can be put in the file at the discretion of the candidate. And if it is, it should be considered by the committee. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think this is where we left off with respect to Article 10. So 10.09, a performance of a candidate's unsatisfactory in their third year review. The candidate may be offered a further 1-year terminal appointment. So this would really be dealing with someone who was up for an extension. This is the added part of that was that if they're unsuccessful, the individual will be offered a further 1-year appointment. 10.26. So 10.26, when you look at the language, that stems from a memorandum of understanding the parties had entered into during the previous collective agreement. And it dealt with really consultation of department heads in departmental and deans in departmentalized faculty. And it was really with respect to a process whereby some deans would engage with the department heads to basically have a broad discussion about the tenure submissions and files of various candidates across the faculty. So the main points, it's a rather lengthy memorandum of understanding, but the main points here is that consultation only occurs after the head has submitted their own written recommendations. The purpose of which is clearly stipulated to be ensure consistent application of tenure criteria across the faculty. And it's a consultative process and solely advisory to the dean, where it indicates there's no voting in terms of, whether there's a majority vote or any kind of vote which would weigh or influence whether an individual's submission was being recommended or not recommended. When you have an opportunity, have a look at clause 10.26. It does, as I say, for departmentalized faculty, outline what that consultation process should look like. Article 11. So we move on. I think we've addressed some questions already about promotion. So we'll dig a bit deeper into the promotion article. But as I say, some of the questions we've already discussed have dealt with promotion. So with respect to promotion, application promotion to rank of professor, clause 11.18c is explicit. Consideration shall be given to either superior research or superior teaching. So the candidate has to specify which of those two streams they are putting forth in their submission, either superior research or superior teaching. That's the candidate is required to make that declaration. Application for early promotion can only be made once for each rank, as we previously, I think, touched on. It's not fatal in any way if you're unsuccessful for early promotion. It just means you're unsuccessful, and then you'll go through in the regular timing. So it doesn't have the same impact on our tenure language. And the other point there to note is respect motion. Each application is going to be judged on its merits, i.e., the criteria that's outlined in the collective agreement. So early promotion. With respect to early promotion.
Sorry, I just had one thing to add. So
yeah.
with the previous slide, so sometimes it's not clear what do you mean by judged on the merits. And I think one thing that we need to remember as committee members is we're not comparing different or ranking different applications. So each application is considered independently on its own merits.
Okay. Early promotion. And I think we touched on this one. I think one of the questions: if a candidate achieves early promotion prior to granting tenure review occurs in the year that it would have occurred had the early promotion not been granted. Essentially, has no impact on the tenure review cycle. If applying for promotion prior to the granting of tenure, promotion application should be considered separately from any review schedule as part of the tenure cycle review process. So they'll be considered separately. I think the point was made earlier that if someone is if someone's granted early tenure as an assistant, then they're automatically promoted. I think Amy touched on that earlier in terms of the why some folks have perhaps different perspectives on going forward with promotion and tenure or early submissions. Criteria for promotion is outlined in clause 11.14, and I think those criteria, certainly the first bullet has not changed from the prior collective agreement. We do have a note in there in new language with respect to Indigenous knowledges. So with respect to Article 11, I suggest have a look at that new paragraph. It's a new paragraph there, which somewhat coincides with respect to our including the potential for additional referee that can be submitted by a candidate. So we try to make that somewhat consistent. Similar assessment in the sense, similar point with respect to if there are issues with respect to someone's access to research, facilities, specified time of hire, your teaching load, or other available infrastructure that should be included in your file as well, for the committee to be aware of.
Jeff, there's just a question in the chat. Just back to that point about consideration of stuff that's done prior to the tenure track cycle. But the question does note that in clause 1030B, it says for tenure, you need a demonstrated record since the date of appointment of research scholarship and all the other things in subclause B. So my understanding of that is, if the person did something, if the person had, and I'm just thinking particularly in our cases of ASMs who might be in term contracts or have a bunch of postdoctoral positions prior to them getting a tenure track position, they're still doing phenomenal work. They're publishing, they're getting research grants. That shouldn't not necessarily be considered for tenure because it's part of their academic career. But certainly the committee is going to want to see since the date of hire into that tenure track position that that person has continued to grow and evolve and has done all the things to satisfy tenure. So I don't think those statements are contradictory. I think it's just basically, if someone did all kinds of phenomenal work prior to a tenure track position and then they did very little in the tenure track position, well, that's not what the committee is going to want to see with regards to saying, yeah, this person warrants the granting of tenure. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that's been raised there, Amy, in terms of the question and the prior comment. I mean, it's quite right in 10.30B, it's explicit. The documented record is since date of appointment. So that is explicit. And I think that highlights one of the factors, one of the criteria that the committee is really going to be considering and looking for evidence of in the file. The other section that we referenced previously that you referenced with respect to consideration shall also be given to academically relevant achievement prior to tenure track appointment. That language is I'll describe in the preamble, if you will, to the main criteria. So I don't think it's something that would necessarily be excluded. I think from a candidate's perspective, I think certainly I would not disagree with the prospective candidate should include it. But I think in terms of the criteria, B is explicit that the candidate is going to be looking for, certainly, your demonstrated record since date of appointment. So I think both are there, just perhaps in different sections, perhaps different weight that they be provided by the committee in assessing the file.
Another question in the chat from Scott McLaughlin. In clause 1114B, it says the candidate shall demonstrate an appropriate record of academic performance since the most recent promotion decision. How should we judge appropriate here?
So that was 1114B, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know for those who've served on the committees previously, Eric or others or Josh. I don't know if there's any words of guidance you may be able to provide to Scott on that one.
Oops. Sure, I can jump in and make a suggestion, but anyone on AF&G, please correct me if you think I'm not offering the best advice here. So, I mean, appropriate is going to be discipline or field specific. So there's, it's one of the reasons it can only be defined so precisely within the collective agreement, of course, is that the collective agreement covers everyone from geographers like me to doctors. So I'm also a doctor, but not that kind. Anyway, my point is that the criteria of appropriate are going to be field specific, disciplinary specific. So you have to use your professional judgment.
Yeah, and just to follow up on Josh is saying, like, there's, it is very discipline perspective specific, and it's interpretive, right? So, it's almost like you'll know it when you see it. Like when you see a file that has demonstrated appropriate growth, you'll know what that is when the file comes to the committee and the committee members are able to discuss what that looks like and what that, how that person has grown since their last promotion. So it's a bit ambiguous, but you don't want to narrow that down because everybody at the university, all ASMs work in such different areas and have different, different focuses and different ways of work. So it's hard to quantify that.
And I guess to be a bit reassuring, that it's a decision that the whole committee makes. And so it can be very helpful to discuss these things among the committee. So you can, someone might say, well, this is not appropriate to the level, and you can discuss why that might or might not be the case. So you're not having to make a decision on your own that you're worried, am I being fair or not? And from the candidate's point of view, of course, they have, ways to respond as well.
Thank you. That hopefully that addressed Scott's question. Thanks very much, folks. With respect to letters of appraisal for promotion, 3 of the 5 as well, pretty much similar to what we just went through with respect to tenure. One of the differences here is bullet number 4 with respect to at least 2 references must hold the rank of professor at a recognized university. I think when we looked at our tenure letters of appraisal, I think it made reference to at least 2 must be at the rank of associate or professor. So in this particular one, that is one of the differences there, that at least 2 must hold the rank of professor at a recognized institution. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as we just went through for tenure appraisal letters. With respect to librarians, the tenure cycle is a bit different. It's based on the anniversary date. What you'll note is most of the the criteria and others are similar to what we just discussed, but similar for librarians. However, their cycle is based on the anniversary date, clauses 1507 and 1605. The librarian can be invited to apply for tenure. The P&T committees, the criteria is noted in clause 1402. And those holding term appointment librarians are not eligible to serve on P&T committees. So if there's specific questions as we go through, we've got about librarians, please by all means reach out to MUNFA or ourselves at Faculty Relations. We'll be happy to discuss those with you and walk you through them. Next section of the presentation we described as words of wisdom, prominent areas. Here we talk about some things to be aware of as well. We look at the role of the committee and the administrative, the academic head. Deadlines, our category. We talked a little bit about this. Deadlines. Our collective agreement is very prescriptive about dates for various things. So we've there's a calendar available, which I think does a very good job of providing a summary of those dates by month, because there are a lot to keep track of, depending on which in the P&T cycle, particularly what particular stream or where you are in your career progression. Any changes require mutual consent of both ourselves and MUNFA through an MOU. And what I can say there is, come P&T time, we have a number of MOUs. And those MOUs typically deal with unforeseen circumstances that people face, such that an individual is something's come up, they can't submit their file by September 15th, they want an extra week or 2 or whatever the time frame is. Those things, while the candidate and the head may be agreeable, the collective agreement requires we actually do up a formal MOU to address those. So our suggestion there is, if indeed you run into that situation, by all means reach out to your head, explain what the situation is. We find then, or MUNFA as well, we find then that the head will contact our office, and we've had no issues really in dealing with MOUs that deal with amendments to the timeframes, particularly dealing with those unforeseen circumstances that come up. And note that if a deadline falls on a weekend, it moves to the next business day. So from a perspective there, but it is important with respect to deadlines that we get the formal approval and through an MOU to make those changes. Once again, committees, if you need some additional time or that, notify your head as soon as possible of the anticipated delay. And once again, it's not uncommon. It's quite often we have to deal with delays. Some of those delays are attributable oftentimes to referee letters being a bit later than what were anticipated. And as well for admin heads, basically once you get word of it, let us know as soon as possible. And generally we can get an MOU put in place relatively quickly to get those delays addressed. So there's no procedural issues arise when the file is being considered. Some we've included here as well, some advice to the P&T committees. All members should be present during transaction of business. You know, in no case shall a business be conducted in absence of more than one member or the chair. And business is confidential. I know it goes without saying, but indeed we do need to make that point. Its transaction of business here is confidential, and that first bullet's really based on there being a full committee of 5. When we speak about, you know, no more than one being absent kind of thing when business is being conducted. Committees, you know, can meet virtually, you know, as long as everybody's got same information, necessary documentation. One of this slide, I think the most important bullet here is bullet number 3, which deals with clause 908. And that clearly outlines candidates must be given an opportunity to address committee's concerns. So if as a committee, the initial decision is negative, the committee is obligated to advise the candidate of the concerns, and to provide an opportunity for the candidate to meet to discuss those concerns. And I can't stress enough to say that this particular clause is very important that it's followed. Because procedurally, it provides an opportunity for the candidate to address those concerns that have been raised by the committee. If it's not followed for some reason or some means that is not executed through an MOU, it can cause significant problems for the parties as we move forward. So this clause is very important. The collective agreement makes reference as well with respect to once a committee notifies a candidate of the concerns, then if a meeting is going to happen, it happens within 10 days of notification. I think it's fair to say that in a lot of these circumstances, it takes, you know, the candidate may require a bit of time to gather up some thoughts or, you know, formulate how they're going to address the concerns. Oftentimes, there's scheduling issues with respect to the committee itself and trying to meet with the candidate. So all that to say is that the meeting is not necessary that the meeting happened within 10 days of the notification, but certainly we do want a period of time when the meeting happens within a reasonable period of time as quickly as possible in moving forward. So as I say, if on this particular slide, clause 908 for committee members is vital and very important for the procedural processing of the files. Amy?
There's a question there from Chris. Does 908 apply to non-decision year reviews? And no, it doesn't. It only applies to when you're making a recommendation, a formal recommendation with regards to an extension or tenure or promotion. So, yeah.
Just a point about the clause 908. Just want to also remind committees that you can request additional information or clarification from the candidate in the fall. So once their file has been submitted, you can ask them for updates and so forth. I believe this all needs to be done through the head. But yeah, that it isn't, it's possible to request information without going to a 908 meeting. You can ask for updates, you know, an updated CV or whatever. I don't think the candidate is under any obligation to give you that information, but it can be a way of making sure that you're considering the latest information, so that, you know, someone had a paper that was submitted on September 15th, but it's actually been accepted in October sometime, right? So you can have communication with the candidate, although I believe it should all be through the head officially.
I think just to follow up on Erica, I think it's clause 804, where the committee or the head can request additional information. It doesn't necessarily say it has to be the head. The head has to make sure that the information is put in the file.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, so it's their responsibility to put it in, but I think my understanding is the committee can go directly to the candidate to ask for some additional stuff.
Yeah, I believe so. I'll go points with respect to clause 908. This slide deals with when committees are dealing with either joint or cross appointment files of candidates with joint or cross appointments. With respect to the joint appointments, the primary unit has responsibility for the assessment. The administrative head and committee of the other unit that must be consulted and the complete file made available to them. The difference then with a cross appointment is that the administrative head and the appropriate faculty members of the other unit must be consulted. So it's not an examination of the file. And as noted here, it's limited to written comments concerning contributions to the candidate. The candidate is made to the cross-appointed unit. When it makes reference here, when the reference in the language to the appropriate faculty members, generally that's been held to be those individuals with which the individual has had a working relationship in the cross-appointed unit. Those would be generally the ones that you'd reach out to and try and get some input. But it does not include a review of the file with respect to cross appointments.
There's a question in the chat. Can the extra info be provided by the candidate with that request? And my understanding is yes. So for example, if you had a paper in progress and then it got published, say in September, and you wanted to just update the committee, make that note, my understanding is yes. In clause 805, it says the candidate has a right to insert a response, but shall not, this is just in response to any negative reviews, but then it goes on to say that no new or substantive material can be put in the file after the committee has submitted its report. So that's my understanding, Jeff. I don't know if you understand anything different, but if there's an update or there's information that the candidate wants to make sure the committee is aware of with regards to, like I said, papers in progress or anything like that, they are able to do that up to the point where the committee submits its report.
Yeah, that as well, Amy. That's my understanding as well. As long as the report's not issued, the candidate can provide that information to the committee. And from that perspective, it certainly makes for fine sense that the committee has the complete information, in terms of making their final report. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a question from Paul.
Yes. In this case, whether the administrative head will consult with the other department before sending these documents to the PNT committee, or PNT committee will make decision, then it will come to the administrative head, then we should consult. When we should consult. The timing, I'm asking the question about timing, when this should be done with the other department where it is joint appointment.
So with Paul, the question being when the committee consults with a joint appointment, when the committee would consult with the administrative head and the committee of the other unit. Is that the question?
That's right. Yeah. So then, first of all, it's not the committee, right? It's the administrative head will consult with the other administrative head, right? So the committee is not going to consult with the other department, right? Am I right? Because we had that case, that kind of scenario before. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so the head will take care of getting that letter from the other unit. You might want to nudge the head if it isn't in the file yet. They may need to nudge the other unit a couple times because they're probably dealing with their own files. But yeah, it's not the committee's responsibility to get that information.
So the head should get that information and provide the full information to the PNT committee?
That's right. So the head needs to contact the joint or cross, or I guess we're talking about joint appointments. For the joint appointments, that the head has to, and cross appointments, I guess. Yeah. I think that falls on the head.
Okay.
The administrative head, which I guess sometimes is a head and sometimes is someone else.
Okay, thanks.
And there's a question in the chat from David Wilson, who replaces administrative head when the head has a COI with the applicant, e.g. spouse, in the faculty science, would that be the dean? You want to declare a conflict of interest to the conflict of interest committee and you can propose some ways to mitigate it. You can discuss this with your head or your dean beforehand. You can also consult with MUNFA about who you think would be an appropriate head. So it doesn't automatically mean that it's your dean. So that's something that, you want to deal with before this process starts. So if you can see this coming, on the way, then that should already be done. You should probably, in that case, if the person applying for promotion is a spouse of the department head, that conflict of interest should have already been taken care of before that. So that's where you apply to the conflict of interest committee and suggest some alternatives ahead of record. would be what it's considered. You do not need to follow the guidelines that were put out by the Dean of Science about conflict of interest, because they go against the conflict of interest regulations of the university. So you really just want to focus on the university policy on conflict of interest.
And my understanding is that, so if there is a case like that where there's going to be a potential conflict somewhere along the way up the chain towards the president, that Faculty Relations and MUNFA would be involved early, because my understanding is we have to sign an MOU, right? Because it's very clear in the collective agreement how those recommendations have to flow. So if there's going to be a divergence, or if there's going to be a bypass somewhere along the way, then MUNFA and Faculty Relations have to become aware and sign an MOU to that effect. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've done that, as you can recall, Amy, a number of circumstances where the reporting relationship, where there is, for whatever reason, a conflict, and we do need and, have implemented a number of MOUs which provide the who the committee submits a report to, and oftentimes it's the dean, or depending on whoever it's, so that does require an MOU. And something to which is something to get addressed early in that process, so that there's everybody clearly understands what their role is and who submits reports to.
That's why it's so important for P&T committees to be formed by May 15th.
Hint, hint, hint.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone higher up the chain. It can be lateral as well. So it could be a head in a cognate department, could be. So there's a lot of options in terms of that head of record. So yeah, definitely bring MUNFA in the loop and Faculty Relations early on.
Okay, continuing with the advice to P&T committees. With respect to timelines, some units may have a number of files to review in a given academic year. So with respect to recommendation based on time limits under the collective agreement is do them in the order of non-decision year reviews, tenure decisions, and promotion decisions. And that ties in with the various timeframes under the collective agreement. With respect to the consideration of teaching evaluations, they're not required for the motion and tenure assessment files. One change you'll note in Article 801 is that if a candidate includes teaching evaluations, the prior reference to a three-year requirement or submission of the last 3 years of those evaluations no longer in the collective agreement. So that is, excuse me, that's no longer there. As we've noted previously, there's certainly been arbitration decisions. We say recent. I guess we could amend that now. It's going back a number of years that finds that course evaluations were flawed in assessing teaching effectiveness. And this teaching evaluations should not really be the determining factor in assessing teaching effectiveness. That's one thing to note there. If an ASM does not submit their teaching evaluations, committee is not in a position to draw any negative conclusion, no adverse inference from that. However, though, if a file does not contain any evidence of teaching effectiveness, that we believe that certainly will be grounds for a negative recommendation. So there certainly is a requirement that the file contain the evidence with respect to teaching effectiveness. Statement on teaching philosophy is not required. However, in the collective agreement, we have included in Appendix B a co-teaching dossier sample, which is a good reference for individuals and candidates to consider when preparing their file. And it's I think we updated that as well when we put the most recent collective agreement together, Amy. In terms of I think it was an updated version we included there in Appendix B. In terms of criteria that's used in the use for decisions by the committees, well, we've got to focus on the language in the collective agreement. However, note the faculty schools can adopt more detailed criteria. Those criteria cannot contradict the collective agreement. They must be formally approved, so it's processed by a majority vote in the collective agreement. And they must be approved by the vice president academic. There are some, I know, I think Faculty of Engineering, Applied Science, Music as well have their own detailed criteria developed. for consideration. There may even be others as well. However, one key point here is that the recommendations of the committee must be based solely on the documentation in the file. Hence the importance of the candidate, being putting together a file with sufficient detail and evidence, such that the committee can actually find what they need to.
There's a question there in the chat, just based on the what are examples on how to show teaching effectiveness? And I think Jeff mentioned the COUT teaching dossier, which has a list of, I don't know how many there is, there's A to R or something like that, but there's a whole host of lists that the COUT teaching dossier, a list of recommendations for ways that you can demonstrate teaching effectiveness. And again, a lot of that tends to be discipline specific, but yeah, there are recommendations in there. So I don't know if there's any questions on any of the specific examples in the collective or in the COUT teaching dossier. I think we're good.
Okay, I guess we can move on to some advice for administrative heads. I think we touched on some of these points. The file shall be created in consultation with the administrative head. The materials for the file be submitted in electronic format if appropriate. The other point to note is here, a collective agreement provides applicants can have access to the file anytime. Head must notify the candidate of the right to include in the file any rebuttal or written comments regarding any documents inserted in the file. With respect to as well, before sending the file to external referees, the head shall remove documents containing non-decision year reviews and prior recommendations. Otherwise, the full file is available to the referees. The purpose there, I think, is self-evident in terms of we certainly do not want external referees unduly influenced by prior reviews or recommendations. Well, hence the note there to remove those. Collective agreement requires, under both Article 804 and 1409 for librarians, that the committee chair must communicate a list of the final contents of the file to the candidate. That's prior to commencing a review. That's a requirement under the collective agreement. As well, the candidate may reply to a negative recommendation as long as the final decision has not been made by the president and the reply does not include any new substantive material. So if a candidate wants to reply to a negative recommendation, they would submit that reply to the next level of administration. So with respect to for example, if the candidate wanted to submit a reply to a negative recommendation from a committee, it would submit that to the dean or department head. Likewise, if the candidate wanted to reply to a negative recommendation from the dean, that would then be submitted up the line to the provost. So simply, but the key there is that option is available for candidate, provided the final decision has not been made by the president. So that's a point there to recall, to certainly be aware of a note in that particular section. Some from a procedural perspective for administrative heads, the administrative heads convene the first meeting of the committee. However, they're really, they should only attend future meetings when invited to do so by the committee. The collective agreement also outlines an option that the head could request at the meeting of the committee. Doesn't happen very often, but if something, some particular issue arose, the head can request a meeting committee, but otherwise the head should only be meeting the first time with the committee. When external referees are contacted by the deans, they should receive the relevant sections of the collective agreement regarding the P&T criteria, any supplementary criteria, and as well there is a model letter that that has been developed and has been sent to deans. I think there are copies of that available on the Faculty Relations website for the various referees, and so that's there, and that model letter should be used when indeed contacting referees, and the purpose of that being so there's consistent information conveyed. Basically, if there are any concerns with respect to, you got any questions about where you are as a candidate with respect to tenure review cycle, please contact our office. Happy to provide you with that information.
There's a question in the chat. I think that's Anne. Is it Anne Graham? Yep. AGGs. Yep.
Thank you. So just going back to the candidate's right to respond to anything that is placed in the file, that requires also that the candidate be notified that something's being placed in the file, right?
Absolutely, yep. There's provision, yep.
And whose responsibility is that? Is it the
I would suggest that the head is the I'll use the term gatekeeper of the file. So if things are being placed in the file, I think you're quite right. The collective agreement prescribes or certainly infers if it's not explicit that no item should be placed on the candidate's file without the candidate's knowledge. But I would also think that obligation would rest with the head as the I'll say the maintainer, the gatekeeper of the file. Amy, anything different?
No, and just and I'd also just for department heads and deans and administrative heads, the personnel file is a very clearly defined file within the collective agreement. I know as administrators, oftentimes there might be a file on your desk that you keep things in, but anything that's added to the file from a personal file perspective, it has to be that defined personal file as outlined in Article 1, just to make sure that folks know that.
which is different than the assessment file? Sorry, Amy.
Right, yeah. So I mean, the past reviews would get added to a file. So there might be things that the administrative head is going to take from the personal file that has to go into the assessment file, but it has to be something that's in the official personal file. It can't be the file that's in their desk. It has to be the official personal file.
And I think the question as well, I think, Amy, was geared towards anything that's going to be placed in the assessment file. Certainly, in order for the candidate to be able to make a decision about submitting a notice or negative, a commentary about that document placed in the file, that would have to be something presented to, or the candidate would have to be made aware that something was being, some material was being placed in their file. And I think from that, your comments quite right in terms of personnel file. And I think likewise it goes that if anything's going to, nothing can be placed on that assessment file without the candidate being made aware.
Another question there in the chat. For different levels of tenure, is there a list of required documents that the admin head can use as a checklist to ensure all the required files are present for the committee? Do you mean different levels of tenure, like the different people in the department going up for tenure, or being as part of the review cycle? I'm not sure on that question. Yes to both. Okay. If I don't know how that gets generated in academic units, does the head get a list of kind of where people are in the different cycles? Okay.
Yep. So each year our office will send out a list to the respective head about who's up for which, where they are in their cycle for the upcoming academic year. So that list gets distributed to the head. So that's, as I say, that's generated by, and that's for each academic year. So that list should identify clearly what files you would anticipate being reviewed. Can't say it's 100% perfect. Scattered time there may be something slipped through cracks, but that list should generally be accurate when the head receives it in terms of where people are in their P&T cycle.
That's right. And then for any promotion applications, they would go directly. There has to be an application directly to the head, so they'll get those as well.
Yeah. What about the composition of, say, fourth year non-decision assessment file? Like what's the ideal composition of that file? I think a checklist would be really valuable.
You should ask Faculty Relations for that. That's a great idea. No, I think heads would get that information from advice from Faculty Relations. Is that right, Jeff?
No, I mean, I think the question Matt has posed here is in terms of, is there a checklist available of what should be included, say, in a fourth year non-decision year review file? Right. We don't, Faculty Relations, I don't think the parties have turned their minds, maybe they have, but I don't think we've turned our minds collectively to what, are there certain items or material that should be included in certain files, whether they be non-decision year review files or whether they're, promotion or tenure files. So I don't believe there's a checklist available in terms of what are some basic elements in a file, aside from the COUT dossier, which really deals with your teaching dossier. I don't think there's another resource available. I mean, there may be sound reason to have one, but Amy, I don't think there's anything else that we use or have shared.
No, and sometimes, and especially for second year reviews, for those first reviews, you get questions from ASMs. What should I include in my file? How should I build my file? I always suggest that the ASMs speak to their heads. They speak to their colleagues. They speak to people who, are in the department that have been around for a while. They can help kind of model that, because again, it's so discipline specific. So I know a checklist at first might seem like it's going to be really useful, but I worry about kind of that narrow kind of having, and then committees having a checklist that someone doesn't have ABC, well, then they might get a negative review. So I always suggest to ASMs, especially when they're building their first file, which is a non-decision year review file, to reach out to their colleagues to say, what do you typically see in a file? How are they typically arranged? Would you mind taking a look at my file and giving me some feedback? And in fact, the collective agreement says that the file shall be prepared in consultation with the head. So there's an onus on the administrative head to provide some of that advice and some of that initial groundwork to get that file prepared and submit it before it goes to the committee.
Thanks.
Also, I just want to remind folks that a candidate can ask anyone in the department for advice, even if they're not, even if they're already known to be on the P&T committee. So you can ask anyone for advice, or any of your colleagues can ask you for advice, even if you're on the P&T committee, before they submit the file. There's a question about 803. Perhaps the question is more about 803, where it says clause 803, before making the file available to the P&T committee, the administrative head shall insert copies of any relevant documents previously placed in the official personal file of the candidate, including non-decision year, etc. So the relevant documents in the official personal file, that official personal file does have a specific definition of what can be in there, what can't. And so I think the heads could consult with faculty relations on that if they are not sure about what that definition means, but it's defined in the collective agreement. Is that right, Amy?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I think the question for Maria is, are there any other relevant files? So no, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, anything that's relevant documents, relevant files, that all has to be related to whatever might be in the personal file. And that could be the recommendations from past years. That could be, I don't know, other things that might be relevant to go in the file. And I know I'm kind of using that loosely, but from my understanding, mostly this is to deal with the past reviews, right? So they want to make sure that the second year review file is going to be included in the file, the third year review, the fourth year file, whatever. Yeah.
And just a quick something about the previous slide, the first bullet there. As a committee chair, you might not know the final contents of the file, but your head will. And so your head, in my experience, the head has always provided that and communicated it to the candidate, as well as putting a copy in the documents that the committee gets. But yeah, if it's actually the committee chair's responsibility, I would recommend that you ask the head, because there really isn't a good, the head knows exactly what's in there.
I guess this is one of our last slides here when we talk about accommodations, accommodation ASMs with disability. There's some advice in the P&T calendars. A reminder here that all accommodations are based on individual circumstances, and they're based upon prohibited grounds under the Human Rights Code. And if there are accommodation measures in place, they will generally form part of the assessment file, so the committee is aware of of those particular accommodations. So we just include that as reference. And hey, that was our second last slide. Any points or questions that that are still lingering? As Dale indicated at the beginning, this is recorded. We will post our sessions on their respective websites within after we complete our next session. And if there are questions that arise after this is concluded, you think about them next day or two, whenever, certainly by all means, drop Amy an email, send me an email, whatever the case might be. Happy to follow up with you, but also happy to open it up as well if there are any particular questions or comments people would like to make that they didn't have an opportunity to cover off.
Thanks. I have a question. Will this slide deck be posted somewhere? Because like if we're meeting with candidates, it'd be helpful to kind of go through these slides without having to kind of go through a recording, and also other like links that were mentioned, like the COT teaching dossier is, or other links that are important resources. Are those in an easy to find place?
So the slides will be available. I think Amy was nodding in the affirmative. The slides are definitely available and will be posted. The P&T calendars, I think, are helpful as well with respect to there are, as indicated, a significant number of dates and times depending on when it is, when you get notice, when you get submitted. So I think the calendars do a pretty good job of trying to summarize those and make them concise and specific to what needs to be done in various months. Any other resources though? The COUT.
And just so people know where to go, my understanding, Jeff, is that your office actually puts the information on the Faculty Relations website. Yeah, and I'm just trying to get there's too many windows going on right now, but Dale, do you know if the COUT teaching dossier, there's a direct link? It is in the back of the collective agreement, so you might have to go through the PDF of the collective agreement, but I don't know if we have a direct link to the COUT teaching dossier. Oh, I think I might have it here.
Yeah, maybe those resources, the links could just be on the Faculty Relations website as well, just to make them easy to find.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Yeah, good idea.
Oh, and so Erica has in the chat, if anybody wants to grab it, screenshot it, whatever, the COUT has it on their website as well, obviously. But yeah, I do agree that it would be very helpful to have it all in one location. So maybe Jeff, your office is going to put the recording up, put the slides up, and put the COUT teaching dossier link. That might be helpful.
CITL can also provide advice about putting together your teaching dossier, or following Luke's question, different ways to evaluate teaching. So encourage your colleagues to reach out to them.
Is it still called the Instructional Development Office?
It's called CITL now.
Is it the Instructional Development Office was the part of CITL that normally ASMs would reach out to?
I don't know the structure now. I don't understand. I always have to hunt around for stuff on their website because I'm not sure how it's divided up. But if you just email, anyone over there, they would help you out. But they have a lot of stuff on their website if you can get to the right location.
Any other questions that folks would have? If not, certainly we're happy to entertain any follow-up questions. If anyone has any in the days that follow, certainly by all means send either of us an email. We're happy to get you a response. Otherwise, thanks very much everybody for signing on today. Really appreciate it. Great turnout. I think we had over at one point in time close on 70 participants. So certainly it's great to get this information out there, and we will get our information posted on the website, the slides, and etc., so that making an easy resource for folks. Otherwise, folks, thanks very much for this afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.